A 39-year-old mother bled to death after childbirth. The device that could have saved her had been repossessed weeks earlier because her hospital couldn't pay its bills. October 2023. Brighton, Massachusetts. St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. Sungida Rashid was 39 years old. She had just given birth. And then she started bleeding. Her doctors knew exactly what to do. There is a device, an embolism coil, specifically designed to stop this kind of hemorrhage. Doctors use it. It works. Lives are saved. But when they went to get it, it wasn't there. The coils had been repossessed weeks earlier. Because Steward Health Care, the company that owned St. Elizabeth's, hadn't paid its medical supply vendors, so a debt collector came and took the equipment, and nobody told the patients. Sungida Rashid bled to death. She left behind a family. She left behind a life. And somewhere, at that exact moment, the CEO of Steward Health Care was preparing to take delivery of a $40 million yacht. This is not a story about a hospital that ran out of money. This is a story about where the money went. Ralph de la Tour ran Steward Health Care for 14 years. In that time, he collected approximately $250 million in personal compensation. He bought a $40 million super yacht, a $7 million Texas horse ranch, 2 corporate jets worth $95 million combined, a luxury fishing boat, and the hospitals, 31 of them across 8 states, serving more than 2 million patients every year. They ran out of biopsy needles. They ran out of catheters. Radiology machines sat broken and unrepaired. Special beds that prevent bed sores? Repossessed. Nurses reached into their own pockets to buy baby formula for patients. Pediatric nurses pooled their own money, to buy proper boxes to present dead newborns to grieving parents. Because Steward wanted them to use cardboard shipping boxes. Cardboard shipping boxes. In May 2024, Steward filed for bankruptcy. The largest hospital system bankruptcy in American history. $9.2 billion in liabilities. 5 hospitals permanently closed. 2,400 workers laid off. Ralph de la Tour refused a Senate subpoena, invoked the Fifth Amendment, sued the United States Senate, and then resigned, with every dollar intact. No criminal charges, no clawback, no law changed. In a moment, I'm going to show you the financial mechanism that made all of this legal. But first, you need to understand how a nonprofit hospital built over a century of serving the poor became a private equity cash machine. Because that story starts in 2010. And the signs were there from day one. Caritas Christi. It's a Latin phrase. It means the love of Christ. For most of the 20th century, that name meant something real in Boston. 6 Catholic hospitals, founded by nuns, built to serve the sick and the poor. If you were a working-class family in Dorchester, or Brighton, or Methuen, Caritas Christi was your hospital. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't wealthy. But it was there. For 159 years, in some cases, there. In 2010, Cerberus Capital Management bought it. $246 million. Non-profit to for-profit overnight. They renamed it Steward Health Care. They installed a cardiac surgeon named Ralph de la Tour as CEO, a man with no prior executive experience running a hospital system of this scale. But he had Cerberus's confidence. And Cerberus had a plan. The plan was not to make the hospitals better. From the outside, Steward looked like a growth story. Under de la Tour's leadership, the system expanded aggressively, acquiring hospitals across Massachusetts, Florida, Texas, Arizona, and beyond. By the time it collapsed, Steward operated 31 hospitals across 8 states. It employed 30,000 people. It treated more than 2 million patients every year. That's a lot of revenue flowing in. And here's the detail that matters, the one you need to hold on to. Between 2010 and 2020, while Steward was growing, Cerberus extracted approximately $800 million from the system. Management fees, dividend recapitalizations, transaction fees. $800 million pulled out of hospitals that were supposed to be using that money to buy supplies, pay staff, and keep equipment running. $800 million. To understand what that number means, that $800 million, had it stayed inside Steward, could have paid off the debts that ultimately caused the system to collapse. The Boston Globe would later report that number. Nurses would later testify to it in the United States Senate. But in 2016, something happened that made the extraction problem dramatically, catastrophically worse. Cerberus orchestrated a sale-leaseback deal. Steward sold its hospital buildings, the actual physical buildings, to a real estate investment trust called Medical Properties Trust for $1.2 billion. Cerberus pocketed $484 million of that in a single dividend. And then, largely, Cerberus walked away. But Steward still had to operate in those buildings. So now the system owed rent. Not a little rent. $6.6 billion in long-term rent obligations to a real estate company that had no interest in whether patients lived or died. The hospitals were still standing. The patients were still coming. But Steward was now a tenant in its own wards. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey called it a Ponzi scheme. In April 2024, when the full picture finally became clear. But by then, the damage was already done, and patients were already dying. Let's talk about the money. Because the money is the evidence. While Steward's hospitals were running out of biopsy needles, while radiology machines sat broken because there was no budget to repair them, while special beds designed to prevent bed sores were being repossessed from patients still lying in them, Ralph de la Tour was spending. In 2021, he bought a super yacht. $40 million. The kind of boat that has a crew, a helipad, and its own support tender. In 2022, he bought a Texas horse ranch. $7 million. He operated 2 corporate jets, simultaneously, valued at a combined $95 million. A luxury fishing boat. A significant personal donation to a wealthy prep school. Senator Bernie Sanders put a number to it on September 12, 2024. $160 million. That is the combined value of the yacht, the jets, the fishing boat, and the prep school donation alone. Senator Sanders asked the question directly. How many hospitals could have stayed open? How many lives could have been saved if that money had gone into high-quality health care instead? De la Tour's total compensation over his tenure at Steward, approximately $250 million. Verify. This figure cited in Senate hearing records and press reporting. Confirm precise sourcing. $250 million. From a company that couldn't afford catheters. Now here's the 90-second rule moment. Because something just shifted. Because we've established the spending. But the spending is only half the crime. The other half is what was happening inside the hospitals at the exact same time. The Boston Globe Spotlight team, the same team that broke the Catholic Church abuse scandal, spent months investigating Steward. What they found? At least 15 instances where patients died due to equipment shortages or critical staffing failures. 15. Confirmed. September 2023, Good Samaritan Medical Center. A patient arrived with acute chest pain, a textbook cardiac emergency. That patient waited, not in a treatment room, not in a bed, in the registration line. 19 nurses had been scheduled for that shift. 8 showed up. The patient died waiting to be checked in. Legal note. Details sourced from Boston Globe Spotlight reporting. Confirm direct attribution before publishing. December 30th, 2023. Holy Family Hospital, Methuen, Massachusetts. Richard Fingleton, 81 years old, came through the emergency department. For 7 hours, no one checked his vital signs. 7 hours. Federal investigators issued an immediate jeopardy citation, the most serious safety designation in American hospital oversight. Richard Fingleton died. Carney Hospital, Gilberto Melendez Brancacho, 31 years old. He was supposed to be on one-to-one monitoring, meaning a staff member assigned specifically to watch him continuously. He died alone of respiratory arrest. There was no one there. And Sungida Rashid, age 39, mother, October 2023, who bled to death because the embolism coils that could have saved her life had been taken away by a debt collector weeks before she ever walked through the door. The dialysis provider Fresenius threatened to stop servicing Steward's Massachusetts hospitals entirely over unpaid bills. They ran out of central lines. They ran out of catheters. The beds that prevent bed sores in immobile patients? Gone. Senator Elizabeth Warren called it what it was. Ralph de la Torre used Steward hospitals as his personal piggy bank. But here's the question that the evidence demands, and the one we haven't answered yet. When regulators, suppliers, and staff all knew something was catastrophically wrong, who was watching? And why did it take until bodies were counted for anyone to act? Here's what the cover-up looked like. Not in the movies, in the actual documents. Steward didn't hide the crisis from everyone. Internally, the financial distress was visible for years. Vendors were demanding payment. Suppliers were threatening to walk. Staff were filing incident reports. Union representatives were raising alarms through official channels. But externally, to regulators, to the public, and most critically to patients, Steward maintained the posture of a functioning hospital system right up until it couldn't. Fact needed. Specific internal communications or memos documenting when executive leadership first received formal written warnings of patient safety risk tied to financial distress. What we do know from Senate testimony and court filings is the shape of the deception. Steward continued accepting patients, billing insurance companies, and presenting as a going concern while its supply chains were actively collapsing. Nurses were buying supplies with personal funds because there was no institutional process to get those supplies any other way. That is not a supply chain hiccup. That is a deliberate decision to continue operations without the resources to operate safely. And then, on May 6, 2024, Steward filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Largest hospital system bankruptcy in United States history. $9.2 billion in total liabilities. $6.6 billion of that owed in rent. To a real estate company. For buildings that used to belong to the hospitals themselves. No admission of wrongdoing was filed with the bankruptcy. The bankruptcy was structured around debt, not accountability. Ralph de la Torre, as CEO, was not personally liable for the corporate obligations of Steward Health Care. His $250 million in personal compensation, taken over 14 years, was his. Legally. The Senate tried to change that calculus. On July 25, 2024, the Senate Help Committee voted 16-4 to issue a subpoena compelling de la Torre to testify. It was the first Senate subpoena of a private executive in this context in recent memory. De la Torre refused to appear. He invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The United States Senate then voted, unanimously, to hold him in criminal contempt of Congress. The first such unanimous contempt vote since 1971. The last time the Senate did this, Nixon was in the White House. De la Torre did not go to jail. He filed a lawsuit against the Senate panel itself. And then he resigned. October 1st, 2024. Walked away. Every dollar intact. Now consider the settlement math. Because there is no settlement. There is no fine. There is no penalty. There is only a bankruptcy proceeding still grinding through the courts, in which creditors and former employees in closed hospitals are picking through the wreckage. Cerberus Capital Management extracted approximately $800 million from Steward between 2010 and 2020. That $800 million, had it remained inside the hospital system, equals almost precisely the debt load that forced the bankruptcy. Verify. Confirm this equivalence in formal court filings or Senate testimony record. That is not a coincidence. That is the mechanism. That's not a mistake. That's not an oversight. That's a choice. And a University of Chicago and Harvard Chan School study found that hospitals acquired by REITs through sale-leaseback deals, exactly the structure Cerberus used, face an adjusted hazard ratio of 5.66 for closure or bankruptcy. 25% of REIT-acquired hospitals closed or went bankrupt, compared to 4% of comparable hospitals that weren't. They knew the model. They built the model. They walked away from the model. And the people left holding the wreckage were nurses, patients, and the families of the dead. Kearney Hospital in Dorchester, Massachusetts, closed in August 2024. It had served the poor of Boston for 159 years. 159 years. Founded before the telephone was invented. It survived the Great Depression. It survived 2 world wars. It survived every economic crisis of the 20th century. It did not survive Ralph de la Tour and Cerberus Capital Management. Neshoba Valley Medical Center, closed August 31, 2024. Norwood Hospital, closed November 5, 2024. Rockledge Regional in Florida, closed. 2,400 workers laid off across the system. Many of them nurses and support staff who had stayed, through years of supply shortages, unpaid vendors, and impossible conditions because they believed in their patients. Let me tell you what those nurses testified to in the United States Senate on September 12, 2024. Ellen McInnes, registered nurse, St. Elizabeth's Medical Center, the same hospital where Sungida Rashid died. McInnes told the Senate that nurses at her hospital frequently reached into their own pockets to buy baby formula, Pedialyte, and meals for patients. Not once, not occasionally, frequently, as a matter of course, because there was no institutional mechanism to get those basics any other way. And then she told them something else. Pediatric nurses, the nurses who care for children and for parents who lose children, pooled their own money to buy specialized memorial boxes. The kind of box you use to present a deceased newborn to grieving parents. A dignified container for the worst moment of a family's life. They bought those boxes with their own money because Steward Health Care expected them to use cardboard shipping boxes. Let that settle. The company that paid its CEO $250 million expected its nurses to use Amazon shipping boxes to hand dead babies to their mothers. The Harvard Chan School and University of Chicago study, released in 2024 and 2025, put a statistical frame around what happened at Steward. And what is happening everywhere, private equity applies this model. 25% of hospitals acquired through outright sale, leaseback deals closed or filed for bankruptcy. Compare that to 4% of comparable hospitals that weren't touched by this structure. The adjusted hazard ratio for closure or bankruptcy, 5.66. Source: University of Chicago and Harvard Chan School. Confirm precise publication date and journal. That means a hospital acquired this way is nearly 6 times more likely to fail. This is not bad luck. This is not market forces. This is a predictable, documented, statistical outcome of a financial model that was applied deliberately. And the people who pay the price are not the executives. They are the 31-year-old man who died alone because no one was watching. The 81-year-old man whose vitals went unchecked for 7 hours. The 39-year-old mother whose life-saving equipment had already been taken away. They are the 2 million patients a year who walked into a Steward hospital trusting that someone was keeping the lights on. Someone was. It just wasn't Steward. Steward Health Care is still in bankruptcy proceedings today. Ralph de la Tour resigned on October 1, 2024. He kept his compensation. No criminal charges have been filed. The Senate's contempt referral sits in a Department of Justice queue with no announced action. He sued the Senate panel that subpoenaed him. That case is ongoing. Cerberus Capital Management is still operating as one of the largest private equity firms in the world. It has not faced regulatory action related to Steward. The sale-leaseback model that transferred $800 million out of those hospitals and left them with $6.6 billion in rent obligations remains entirely legal. No federal law has been passed to prevent a private equity firm from doing this again. To another hospital, in another city, to another community that trusts that someone, somewhere, is making sure the embolism coils are on the shelf. Sungida Rashid was 39 years old. She should be alive. If you think that the people who made these decisions should face consequences, that the law should change, that someone should go to jail, that this should not be allowed to happen again, subscribe. We cover these stories every week, because the blind spot is wherever power assumes nobody is watching. Someone has to watch.